All right, thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz, welcome to the program. Generally, I do it every day around noontime Eastern Standard, right here live at YouTube and all the subscribing platforms. You're welcome to join me. I'm not going to take calls right away today, but often I do take live calls. Vitaliy Podgornyy is with me. And Vitaliy, you came to my attention because you're doing some very interesting work on YouTube and other venues in talking about philosophy, talking about theology, talking about faith, and talking about how we intersect politics and faith. And I guess I want to start by just asking you to talk a little bit about yourself and how you developed the point of view that you have now.
So my name is Vitaliy, and I started my YouTube channel somewhere around August, and I started my TikTok somewhere around the 1st of January. Yeah, I think it's the beginning of the year. And so where I have the view I have now is somewhere within like early 2020. There was a day where I just randomly started to question things because I just had this random urge. I started questioning everything. Started questioning the ground below my feet. I started questioning politics. I started questioning all kinds of things. The Bible version I'm reading, the history I'm taught. If the history I'm taught and the timeline is correct, like I just started questioning every single thing because I realized, there's nothing wrong with questioning things, especially if it's true, right? If something is true, the truth will stand. And I don't think there's anything wrong with questioning things. So the only reason you'd be scared of questioning stuff is if the belief you have is a lie, and that's the only reason you wouldn't want to question it. So yeah, I just had this like random urge to start questioning things, and after that, it was like my little Truman Show moment, and that's where I'm at right now.
That's
Yeah,
incredible. No, I mean, you started in a sense to unpeel the onion, the layers that we all are encased in. And I kind of have the same experience. I've been debugging myself for decades in terms of realizing some of the false ideas that I had accepted because that's, as you say, it's like the Truman Show. We live in a bubble, and
exactly.
we are exposed to certain things and not exposed to other things, and that our views, our perceptions are molded and in many ways twisted. And I find it interesting that you began to this process of, in a sense, I suppose, looking within. Some people might even call it prayer. Where in my case, um, one of my recent books deals with a basic mathematical proof in the existence of God, and I usually write on politics and culture and economy, but this was kind of a departure for me. Maybe as I was because of the pandemic, I don't know, but I suddenly started to think about this, and it led to a spiritual experience in my own life, which I had never expected. It was not expected, but it involves like a looking within, and suddenly things come into focus. The lens tightens, and you start to see things in a more deep way, which is, I think, what we're meant to do. So
Exactly.
sounds like you've gone through that process, and you did a program, and you linked to it on your Facebook page, basically proving the existence of God. Can you talk a bit about that?
You're talking about the YouTube video I did? Was
Yeah.
it the 3 examples? So I think there are a lot of proofs of God. First being there's a lot of philosophical proofs, such as the argument of desire. You ever heard that argument? I think it's by
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis.
Oh,
You,
please elaborate a bit.
all right, so the argument of desire states that whatever desire we have in our lives, there always exists something to fulfill it, right? So if you are thirsty, well, water exists. If you are hungry, food exists. Now, whether you get that desire or not, that it doesn't mean you'll get it, right? But that desire exists somewhere in our reality. But we all have this desire to be in eternal paradise, to be happy, to never be depressed, to live forever, right? We think about our family members, we want them to be in a place when they pass away, in a place where they're not suffering anymore, right? We just can't accept that, the fact that they died. And that's usually, even a lot of atheists, when they're on their deathbed, that's when they start questioning things, right? Is there an afterlife? Is, whether there is or isn't. So, yeah, that's one of the first proofs is philosophical. Then there is physical proofs, right? Like the golden ratio, Fibonacci sequence. The whole spiral design is found everywhere. That mathematical design is found in when the oceans crash, the little waves. It's found in the spirals, on babies' heads and our heads.
Are
It's
you
found.
talking about the Mandela theory?
No, this is the golden ratio is a mathematical design that's found like throughout nature. So this is one of the proofs of God. So you can find this everywhere.
Mhm.
But yeah.
No, I mean, that's amazing. I think that, my basic proof in my book is a very mathematical one. It's a very simple one. And that is the principle of the zero, that, the zero means, the symbol of zero means nothing. And everything else is a measurement of something, whether it be positive or negative. It's a measurement of existing entities. But the mathematical principle is that you cannot get something out of nothing. It's impossible mathematically. It's impossible scientifically.
That's the biggest
Something has to come out of something. Nothing can only come out of nothing. And so therefore, how did the universe get created? Out of nothing. It
exactly.
had to have been God. It had to have been something outside of nature. It was a supernatural event. And that one thing doesn't contradict the other. They always say, well, there's a separation between faith in God and science. When it's like the difference between apples and oranges, both things are mutually exclusive. They're both a different discipline. One's a study of the natural universe. The other deals with the supernatural element that created the universe. So, that I know that might be somewhat simplistic, but that's the formula that I use. But your formula is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, it's because truth is simple, and even how you said you can't get something from nothing, right? You can't make matter from no matter. You can't make time from no time. And the one thing people need to know is often the God atheists think, you and I believe in, and the God you and I actually believe in, totally different. We don't believe in some sky daddy, right? The God is far beyond what we can fit on our little 3-pound brain. And another proof for it is the fact that, how people say that the imagination is limitless, right? We can imagine anything. That's
Mhm.
not entirely true. There are some things we can't imagine whatsoever. For example, try to imagine a place where there is no time, no space, no matter. You can't. Impossible. And this is where God lives, outside of our reality completely. Because the way God sees our timeline, in my beliefs, is I think he sees the past, present, and future all at once. He's like far beyond our understanding.
Right. I mean, and in a sense, the idea of the measurement of time and the measurement of space, these are abstract examples of the physical world, which is something you can perceive with the senses. And that, out of the abstract physical world develops the element that made man different than all other beings, which is the ability to reason, the
Exactly.
ability to think, and the use of language, the use of functions that allow us to accumulate knowledge and then to integrate knowledge and build civilizations based on that knowledge. But in order to get to that ability to reason, you have to identify that which is. You have to identify reality. And but the abstract element also involves the definition of, and which was much more controversial, of that which is moral, which is what is good and what is bad. And that's something that's been debated forever, but it's something that it may not be completely accessible to us, but we know a lot. I mean, it is, we have experience over millennia that tells us that the preservation of the individual human life is the basis of all moral society. I just think that that's kind of a given. It's taken a long time. We got to get rid of things like human sacrifice and the basic laws of the Noahide covenant, which is to not murder and to not violate the sacredness of any other person. That all of our moral and ethical laws are based on that simple principle.
Yeah. No,
So
100%. I think when it comes to morality, without God, morality doesn't really exist because where is the threshold, right? If God's not real, why is it wrong to kill? What says it's wrong to kill? You know? But if God is real, that means there is a line that we can't cross, and this line is God, meaning don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. And this is all these things are these moral laws, the 10 Commandments, where we kind of have it built in us because when we do these actions, eventually we feel guilty about it.
now
You know?
you've developed some very interesting analysis of not well-known history, which I think is really interesting. And I'm kind of an armchair historian, and that appeals to me, like the piece that originally where you came to my attention, which was the analysis of Tartaria. So I want you to talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so to kind of simplify it, there is a theory that a couple hundred years ago, the world was completely reset. So we had better technology, our architecture was better. It's just that the farther we go back in time, we just seem a little bit more advanced than we are today. I mean, even in like, ancient Egypt and all these other cultures, they have structures, architecture that we can't even replicate ourselves today with our modern tech, right? Even scientists admit this. They're like, we don't know how they did it. We can only guess. And they have so like crazy advanced structures. And I just don't believe it's just hammer and chisel. So the whole Tartaria idea is that there was some kind of cataclysm a couple hundred years ago and the world was completely reset. History was rewritten. So Tartaria, if there's a lot of old world maps that show this empire where Russia is currently right now, Russia, parts of Asia, and also into Europe, and I believe into the Americas. And you can find this old world map from like the 1800s, 1700s, and it literally says the Tartarian Empire, and it has their flag. And basically, you can find a lot of similar structures throughout the world, these like Romanesque style buildings, right? Like we got the White House, we got all types of similar Romanesque buildings found throughout the world, like in St. Petersburg in America, parts of Asia and Russia. Like you find them everywhere.
I always thought that was an imitation of ancient Rome.
That's what I thought too.
That like if you go to Washington, D.C., it's a replica of Rome. If you look at all of the, and Greece really, because the Romans, lifted it from the Greeks. But if you do look at ancient times and you get into some of this, like if you look at the Egyptian pyramids, you have some incredibly advanced science there. I mean, in India, for example, at the mouth of the Indus River, they found docks that are as advanced as anything that you can imagine today. And that the ancient Greeks apparently had these incredibly sophisticated ships, which had they were like skyscrapers. I mean, you had they could fit 1,000 men all rowing, and there's a coordination of it was unbelievable. So I mean, a lot of this history, and same thing in the Mayan civilization. There's some amazing things. So I mean, I think a lot of this history has been obscured, and that probably could include Tartaria as well, which is really an interesting theory. Why do you think this would be obscured the way it seems to have been?
Well, I think the winners write history. And when the reset happened, or the theory about the reset, they say that there was some kind of cataclysm. Like the year 1800 was a very interesting year. We had all kinds of wars. We had crazy floods throughout the world. We had earthquakes. So they say that all of this happened at once, and there was some crazy cataclysm, and it completely destroyed the whole world somehow. And history was rewritten from that point on. And the point is the winners write history. I think that's the reason.
Now, when you say, I mean, are you talking 1800? Like, that's pretty modern.
I mean, do you remember when? I don't know if you've learned about all the world fairs that came out from the late 1900s.
Right, like the Chicago World's Fair and the Buffalo World's Fair. Sure.
I believe there was ones in Russia, and all these world fairs show the similar structures. And people say that these are leftover Tartarian structures and palaces. And if you look at pictures of old Chicago, downtown Chicago, and St. Petersburg, you always see these wireless looking antennas on top of buildings, and kind of they just look like, basically another point why people would lie is the theory is that Tartaria had free energy, right? Kind of like Tesla coils.
Tesla, yes. I thought of that.
Yeah, so as you can see through a lot of old world buildings, you notice there are a bunch of interesting looking antennas on top. And throughout the streets, you look at old pictures, you also see these strange looking poles with antennas and no wires.
The Eiffel Tower maybe is like that, right?
Exactly, the Eiffel Tower, it looks like some kind of, what's the word?
Like a gigantic radio antenna.
Exactly, something like that, right? Giving off free energy. But we're just told, oh, it's just a monument. It's a simple sculpture or something, right? But it doesn't look like it.
So then what you're suggesting, and this gets into a possible informal conspiracy, because it might involve some financial interest, but that the source of energy before 1800 was basically tapping into means that would not involve oil, and that would not involve the expensive extraction of fossil fuels, and that it was a higher technology.
Yep.
That's really interesting. And I think that it's kind of historic now that when the Rockefellers started to develop oil, they did seek a monopoly on all petroleum products, and they wanted to replace anything that competed with that, including American medicine, I might add, in that before the modern era, we were more homeopathic in our medical approach. Now it's most medicines come from petroleum.
Exactly, petroleum. Yep.
And also the guy that invented diesel fuel, his name was Diesel. He was a German scientist. He was thrown overboard on a passenger ship. There's some very strange things that were going on with that, and with anything that competed with the oil powered vehicle and oil power. So, there's certainly a lot of intrigue going on there. And if people think that this might not have involved a conspiracy, of course it very well may have. I mean, conspiracies happen all the time. My recent book is The Satanic Conspiracy, in that, we accept the fact that there are criminal conspiracies, happens all the time. That's why we have a system of justice. We accept the fact that there are secret societies that engage in criminal conspiracies, like organized crime, like the mafia. So why would we therefore not think that there aren't political conspiracies, organizations that are set up to deceive us and to shape our thinking and to mold our perceptions in a certain way that might benefit them or that might promote their worldview, and at the same time debunk and depress alternative views?
Because it's the inconvenient truth. It's the red pill, right? Like from the Matrix. When you accept the inconvenient truth, that implies you got to change your views and beliefs, which is hard. Change is hard. And people want to be comfortable. They don't want to know that there is some kind of satanic conspiracy involved, that the world, the powers that be. I mean, the Bible talks about that the world's powers are owned by one entity, right? Satan is the god of this world.
Right.
So it just makes people uncomfortable knowing that this might be a reality. So they typically ignore it. They don't want their illusion destroyed. They want to know that, yes, we have a choice in politics. We can vote for this guy. We can vote for this guy. If a problem happens in our society, we can just vote them out. But I'm starting to think that's not the case anymore. I'm starting to think like the Truman Show, right? I don't know if you've seen the movie, the whole movie.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I love that movie.
There's a quote said by Christoph, the creator of the show.
Yeah.
So somebody, an interviewer asked him, he said, why do you think it took Truman this long to come to the realization of the true nature of his world? And Christoph says, it's simple. We accept the reality of the world for which we are presented with. So that's usually everybody, right? But for people like me, like I'm a Christian. I think we should focus on the inconvenient truth. We should look for the truth that's not common, because that's what's important, in my opinion.
Well, in other words, you're not a normie.
No, I'm not. I'm a weirdo.
Yeah, me too. I want to talk a little bit about the psychology behind what makes people conform to accepted, received wisdom. And you say we accept the world that we see because we want order. We want to have. It gives us a sense of control if we think we know what's going on around us. I think that the other element here, and this gets into some of the really dark stuff that's going on in the world right now, I would contend, around stuff like child sex trafficking and really, really ugly things, is that we don't want to believe that people can be that evil. We don't want to think of that, especially when some of these people might be in positions of high leadership where their image has been glorified, and they've been built up as being great arbiters of leaders, and they've been put on the covers of magazines with great pictures and put with a very positive light. We don't want to ascribe to them these sorts of evil activities. And so we don't. And in fact, we almost instinctively attack and mock anyone who questions anyone like that.
Exactly.
It's kind of the Führerprinzip that if you study how the Nazis developed this they knew how to manipulate the masses. They would do these movies with strobe lights at night, and they'd have parades where they would put incense, and people all their senses would be overwhelmed with sight and smell and sound, and they'd have symphony. and then they'd come out the great Führer would give a great speech, and women were passing out. I mean, it was it was a complete sensory control that they were very, very studied at. And I think that we all are subject to some of this because we want to believe, we're looking. I mean, you started the talk by saying that we are naturally, as human beings, we're looking for purpose. We're
Exactly.
looking, and so this is an easy way to get to that. You don't have to do the hard intellectual work of thinking for yourself and the unpopular work of exposing evil. It's easier to get along, and there are rewards when you go along, and punishments when you don't.
Yeah. No, yeah, I mean, that's what the inconvenient truth is. And often people have a lot of cognitive dissonance. They don't want to accept the truth because, again, it's too inconvenient. That implies change, and the ego wants to stay comfortable. Like an example of this is last year or like 2 years ago, I used to read every single kind of Bible version there is. I mean, to me, if a book said Bible, I thought it was okay to read. I thought it was all the Word of God, right? But I don't know if you've seen my video on this, but I made a video on the King James Bible and why it's the most accurate and why I find it to be the most accurate.
Mm-hmm.
So there are 500 Bible versions in English, and a new Bible comes out every year. And all these modern Bibles, they're all like less than like 100 years old, and they are all copyrighted, meaning somebody owns the rights. So if I take this Bible, right, let's say the NIV, and I decided to copy it to try to, give away to churches or whatever, go on missionary trips, I can get sued for that because I don't own the intellectual, property rights, whatever to that. But the King James is not copyrighted. And I just started doing more research because I wanted an accurate Bible. I think it's important to have an accurate Bible. I found the King James to be the most accurate. All these modern versions, they have verses taken out, verses added in. They have blasphemous mistakes. They take titles that belong to Jesus Christ, like morning star, and they give it to Lucifer in certain verses like Isaiah. And and the thing is, I check with like Hebrew, right, on like Strong's Concordance, and they don't even have words like what's it called? I think there's in the Isaiah verse about Lucifer. Oh, Lucifer, how art thou fallen from heaven? You know that verse. I forgot what Isaiah verse it is. But basically in Hebrew, the word morning star is nowhere found. But all the modern Bibles put the word morning star in it. Basically, it's just the tip of the iceberg. So when I realized this,
they're glorifying Lucifer there, aren't they?
exactly, they're giving him Jesus' title. It rightfully belongs to Jesus. He's called the morning star like 3 times in the Bible, I believe. And when I present this information to my friends, my family is kind of on the same boat with me. And some of my family members have always been reading King James or the Russian version of the Bible. And I believe that every language has one accurate Bible. You don't need 50. So when I presented this information to some of my friends, some of them got hostile and some of them appreciated the information I had to give. And I would ask, because I'm the type of guy, I love challenging my own beliefs and challenging other people's beliefs. So the question I would ask, there are 500 Bible versions. Are they all the Word of God? And they will say, well, of course not. And then I'm like, so how do you know the NIV, the ESV, whatever you read, how do you know it's the accurate Bible? And they would tell me, they'd be like, oh, I don't know. And some of the excuses they would use is, oh, well, there are people who are spiritually bigger than you on YouTube, like Rabbi Zacharias and all these, I don't know, Francis Chan, and they read these modern Bibles. So I'm like, so that's your reason? And like, I'm asking you for your reason, not their reason. And they can never really give a intellectual reason for why they read it. I can give an intellectual reason for why I read only King James, right? It's pretty accurate. Verses are not removed. Verses are not added in. So far, maybe it's not the most accurate, but so far, I haven't seen any mistakes, haven't seen any blasphemous mistakes. It's the accurate English Bible. And it's been used by Christian English speakers for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, in the 1900s, people were all like, oh, we need a new Bible. Why is that? God promised to preserve his word, and he kept his word, and it's the King James Bible in the English language.
I mean, I don't know if you might know this, but I wonder if the King James Bible itself might have been edited. I mean, from the time when it was first codified under King James to today. I mean, because I have a King James Bible. I wonder, is that the same and unexpurgated Bible that was originally established by King James, who did that with a very serious group of translators that included Hebraists, and took many years to develop that Bible, and it is the best Bible in the English language. But is that the same Bible that we have now that's called King James?
Yes, it's the same one. And the thing about King James, when he commissioned it, he wasn't even allowed to go in the rooms where the scribes were when they were translating. And the thing about King James, he also wrote a book called Demonology. And at first, it sounds pretty weird. It sounds like a book on witchcraft, but apparently, the book is about the type of what's it called? The type of things witches are into. Because King James believed that witches. Well, he didn't believe. He knew that witches were out for his life, and sorcerers were witches. So he's the one who started the witch hunts, actually. And he wrote a book on demonology about their practices, just to know who's a witch, who's a Satanist. And he wrote this book called Demonology to explain their practices, to know who they are and how to catch them. So at first, people like to judge, they like to bring up, oh, King James wrote demonology. And we're like, do you know what demonology is? And, because, yeah, it sounds like a book on witchcraft, but if you really read about it, it's not a book on witchcraft. It's about King James exposing the practices of these Satanists, because he was scared that these witches and Satanists were out for his life, because he commissioned the King James Bible.
Right. And also, there's always been an underbelly of, I would suggest, conspiracy amongst people who embrace certain ideologies that are trying to overthrow God in heaven. They're trying to overthrow all of the rule, the legitimate forms of government, and they want to create a world order. And I don't think that when I'm saying that's particularly controversial, because I think that we could look at the history of the founding of the Illuminati movement in Europe, and in my own faith of Judaism, you have the false Messiah Shabtai Zvi in the 17th century that corrupted a large portion of the Jewish people with a false paradigm, with I would even argue, a slightly satanic, or at least an antinomian idea, that in order to create this new age and this perfected universe, you had to get rid of belief in God. You had to turn morality on its head. Everything that was good would become evil, and everything that was evil would become good. That's the basic principle of the satanic movement. And King James was battling that. A lot of good leaders have battled it ever since. And part of battling it is exposing it, simply in holding it up to the light of day, because Satan only thrives in the shadows. And Satan is a very alluring and beautiful idea, but it's not what you think it is behind the mask. I would argue that the entire Torah, in their condemnation of idol worship, that's what that was all about. And the idol worship just takes on different forms. It's still with us today. It's called the oligarchy. In a sense.
Yeah.
So
that's how the devil works. Is he doesn't just lie to people, right? When evil presents itself, it's gonna hide behind righteousness. I believe there's a verse in the Bible, and it says Satan presents himself as an angel of light, right? And then if you read further into that verse, it says, so don't be surprised if his ministers also hide behind workers of righteousness. So the thing people need to understand is this is how the devil works. 10 truths and one lie, right? And people overlook that one lie because they focus on the 10 truths. Just like modern Bible versions, when I would present, the fact that King James is an accurate Bible version to my friends, some of my friends got hostile, and they would say, oh, it doesn't say Jesus is the devil in the Bible. And I'm like, of course not. The devil's not an idiot. Most of the modern Bibles, the information, most of it's true, 60, 70%. But it's those few lies that you guys overlook. It's always like that. So 10 truths, one lie. That's how it works. It's always happened, right?
Right. And those in power are the ones who write the books, and that includes the religious books. And
exactly.
There has been a movement to strip away the basic tenets of faith and the understanding of the moral and ethical precepts of Sinai, which is embraced by both Christians and Jews, in modern times. And in fact, in my recent book, The Satanic Conspiracy, I mentioned as an example the work of Julian Huxley, who was the founder of UNESCO. He was the grandson of T.E. Huxley of England, who was the main promoter of Darwin's theories. His brother was Aldous Huxley, who sent out a warning to the world with his Brave New World, where he talked about the world entering into an international chemically induced concentration camp. And Huxley set out a constitution for education of the world, the UNESCO being the World School Board, as they call it. where he called for the implementation of evolutionary humanism, which would be the one world religion, but it would leave in place the religions of the world. It would leave in place the trappings, the churches and the ceremony and the stained glass and the holidays and the rituals, but it would strip away and replace the actual meanings, the philosophy, the doctrine, by changing the meaning of words. And that, that instead of belief in God, they would come to believe in social justice, however that's defined. Everything, instead of believing in some internal principles, the ultimate virtue would be to accept everyone else's principles, and to not do so would be prejudice. And other similar doctrines. I mean, it's kind of it's a stealth replacement. It leaves, you don't realize it's happening, and most people don't see this as happening. But take a good look at your church and your synagogue and your mosque, and you will see it happening.
Yep. No, that's the interesting thing about that. Yeah, no, people just want to be comfortable. They don't want the inconvenient truth whatsoever. And like the word ego is not found in the Bible, but it uses the word flesh, right? And throughout the Bible, it always talks about the flesh holding you back, holding you down. And that's what the ego is. It wants you to be comfortable where you're at, because as soon as you start getting into the inconvenient truth, that's when you become very uncomfortable. I mean, there was a lot of times where I was very disappointed at the truth, right? The fact that I was raised to believe a lie. I mean, that's not fun to know.
Right.
So, and often people don't want that truth, so they just kind of ignore it. They want their comfortable lie.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of character and a lot of humility and humbleness to admit that you're wrong, and most people never get to that. They just simply fall lockstep into a belief, and they follow that for the rest of their life. And I think a lot of that happens when you're young. A lot of it, I think, frankly, happens in more recent decades when a young person goes to college and they get the message that you accept the secular left-leaning establishment view or you're going to be punished. And most people do. I mean, they kowtow to it, they bow to it internally. They're not even necessarily consciously, because they know that if they want to have a happy life, they want to have a girlfriend, they want to go to the fun parties, you want to get a job, you have to. And if you buck it, you're going to be, once in a while they hold somebody up for an auto da fe, an enemy of the masses, and they show what can happen if you don't play the ball game.
No, yeah. There's actually another really interesting verse that I just found, and it's Ecclesiastes 1:18. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. So that's often true. Like I said, when you come across an inconvenient truth, when it comes to politics or the Bible versions, I had to admit to myself, I was reading the wrong Bible versions all my life. I mean, I thought, if a Bible had the title, if a book had the title Bible on it, it must be the word of God. And I was pretty ignorant. But now that I know the truth, it would be really stupid of me to ignore all these mistakes and continue reading these modern Bibles for the sake of comfort. Like, oh, this is what I know. King James is hard. It has archaic language and stuff like that. But even the archaic language, like during King James's time, how like King James Bible has that like Shakespearean kind of language.
That's beautifully written. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. In the 1600s, they didn't even speak that kind of English. That kind of English was 600 years older than the 1600s. The reason King James had it written in that kind of language is for practical reasons. So, for example, when let's say I walk into a room and I point at somebody and I said, "You come with me." How are they going to know who I'm talking about, right? You who? Like all of you or just you? But in King James, thee, right? That's just you or thou, all of you. It really, King James explains who it's talking to in the King James Bible. Is it talking to just the character, or the character in you, or just you? It's very practical, very specific. That's what I love about the King James. Even though it has archaic language, the point of the Bible is not meant to be just easy. And what I noticed is like a lot of the modern Bibles, when I read it, it feels like I'm reading just a regular textbook. Like it's like a 15-year-old wrote it, It does not feel like I'm holding the word of God. It feels like just any other textbook, especially because it's copyrighted. I mean, as soon as it's copyrighted, it's just another book,
And this is happening across the board anyways. I mean, you can take a look at, like, for example, if you look up the definition of socialism in the Merriam-Webster dictionary that was published in the 19th century, it gives you the real definition. which is public ownership of the means of production, public ownership of distribution, of communication. If you look it up now, it doesn't tell you that. They changed it. Instead, it has some vague, it's a, class struggle. They give you some nonsense. I mean, it's like they've completely stripped away the actual meaning. And so, I mean, and Wikipedia is terrible. I mean, I used to use Wikipedia to write my books. And now when you look at that, it's all biased and censored and stripped and dumbed down. And, what you're saying about the Bible, I mean, that's happening in everything. I mean, you look at Time magazine. I mean, I recently was visiting a friend in their summer home about a year ago, and they had a copy of Time magazine that was published in the 60s. And it had an in-depth article that went on for 15 pages on really going deep into a particular subject. Now you don't get that. You get these little quick, shotgun, pieces that give you just some trivial surface examination. They don't go deep into anything. People are not being taught to think anymore in an in-depth way. So this, you're talking about something that is the Bible is a basic, but it really is transcending everything around us. And I mean, I attribute this to the Fabian movement of Britain in the late 19th century, where in a way, I think that Julian Huxley was a product of that. They would change the meaning of words rather than changing laws. They leave the law in place so people think, oh, okay, but they wouldn't question, there would be no debate, but the words themselves would take on new meaning. And I think that this is the manipulation of a corrupt establishment. I mean, establishments are always corrupt, but when they become so enthroned, it becomes worse. I mean, it becomes absolute, and it's now, I think, at a point where it's interlocking around the world. It is more secretive than ever. And what makes this quote unquote conspiracy more dangerous now than it's probably been at any time in history is that now they've got the technology, they've got artificial intelligence, they have transhumanism, they've got the control of the cloud, and what people see in big tech. So, we are in very dangerous times in terms of forgetting our potential as sovereign individuals under God. We are, and most people are not awoke and not woke in the real sense. Although, I mean, I'm optimistic. I think that enough people are awake. I think that the Trump movement represents that, which is why they had to get rid of Donald Trump. But it's still there, and it's still growing, and it's all over the world. People are waking up.
My view on the whole Trump movement, I think, in my views, because I used to support them, I used to pray for that man. I think he was the ultimate Trojan horse. No swamp was drained. I believe he's owned. I believe both sides are owned by the same entity. I think Trump is controlled opposition. He's there to give the good guys, to make the good guys feel good, the moral guys, the conservatives, to make them feel somewhat good about themselves. Oh yeah, we're winning the battle. But as I started doing more research into Trump, again, like I said, I was questioning everything. I started questioning politics, and I'm started asking myself, why do I support Trump? Is it because I'm a conservative and I'm on this, I'm supposed to be on this side? And I started doing more research into Trump, and I realized that Trump has never asked God for forgiveness in his life, meaning he's never repented. I've seen a few interviews of him on like talk shows, and somebody asked him, have you ever asked God for forgiveness? And he said, no, never. I just try and do better. I don't want to get God involved. And so what he's basically saying is, I am the God of my own life. I don't want God involved. Basically, he doesn't repent. But he calls himself a Christian. He says Jesus is king and all that. I mean, but the demons also know that Jesus is king. They know God is one, right? So what's the difference between a demon and Trump? In that sense, I'm not saying he's a demon, but like,
no, I understand. I mean, look, who knows? You might be right. We can't know we can know a lot. I tend to think that Trump is a genuine article. I mean, I think that he is a devout Christian, has become.
And I hope I'm wrong too.
Yeah,
I also started to do more research, and I found out that his pastor from like the 90s, he was actually a 33rd degree Freemason. So I'm like, so that's a spiritual teacher. I'm like, that's interesting.
But I also found out that Trump's father was a secret member of the John Birch Society, which fills me with hope. Not that they're so perfect either, but they do understand, they're patriotic, and they do understand the the nature of the international forces that are seeking to subvert America. I mean, I have a lot of criticism of them as well, but for the most part, that tells me that Trump does know the score. And I think that he's not the same person now that he was when he was younger, when he clearly was a part of the the corrupted establishment. I think he actually is a devout Christian. I mean, at least that's my impression. I can't know that, but the phony figures of people like the Bushes, who present themselves as conservative, but they're very much a part of this sort of, if you will, Masonic establishment, which I tend to agree with you on.
And most of Trump's ideas, like I said, that's how the devil works. 10 truths, 1 lies. Most of what Trump says and does is pretty good, but then there's those few lies that I myself can't overlook because I'm a detailed person.
Right.
And, I was talking to my dad, and he grew up in the Soviet Union, and he said the Soviet Union had this thing where, what's his name? The Bolsheviks actually had controlled opposition. So on the other side, there were the good guys, right? They said the good guys wanted. There was this militarized group of people, right? Kind of like the Q movement, militarized group of people who wanted to, get rid of communism. Bring Russia back to its czar roots or whatever. Bring the crown back, right? And everybody thought that these guys were the good guys. Turns out there were controlled opposition. These guys promised to drain the swamp, just like Trump and the whole movement, but turns out none of that happened, and in the end, you're stuck with what you got, which was communism in Russia.
No, I mean, I think that your thesis is, I mean, Anatoly Golitsyn, who was one of the highest level Soviet spies to defect to the United States, he was given refuge by Jimmy Carter, and he wrote a book called New Lies for Old, where he makes this point. He says in Russia there's going to be an alleged collapse of communism, but it's only going to be a replacement, and it's all controlled. And I think that that's an interesting theory. I don't know that. I do think Russia today is better than it was under the Soviets, but I mean, you have in Russia, not a lot of experience with the development of democratic institutions. So we have to look at it in the context of where Russia is versus where other countries are. Every country is different. And if Trump's the controlled opposition, maybe. I mean, I think that he actually was, the reason they had to get rid of Trump is because he was waking people up, and that he was trying to take on what I think was much bigger and more pervasive, an establishment conspiracy than he fathomed. I think it was well beyond his abilities. But in the context of who he was and what he did a lot, and I think that's why he had to go. I mean, now it's turning out that there's increasing evidence that the pandemic was developed in a lab, and that you have a Chinese communist official now bragging that China has biological weaponry superiority over the United States, and that they've knocked the United States down a few pegs. Did that have I don't know if that's true or not, but I wonder if that might not have had something to do with, I don't want to get too far into this because I'll lose my YouTube channel. Let's just put it that way. But let's just,
you're about to be censored.
I have to be careful here. Let's just say that it might have something to do with the election of 2020 and leave it at that. Anyway, we should move on from there, because I've already been given a strike, and somebody might hear that, and this is the world we are in right now. You can't express these sorts of opinions, or else you will be censored. I know plenty of people.
1984, the Orwellian nightmare.
That's right. So we have to speak in euphemisms. I mean, there was being of Jewish background, I can tell you that the rabbis who developed the Talmud under Roman authority, and Rome was, of course, the ultimate fascist empire at the time, depending upon who was in charge. And they were not allowed to pray. They were not allowed to study in public. They had to do it behind closed doors. And they never knew who might be around or who was listening in, and might have had a couple of people, spies in their midst. So the expression was, the walls have ears. The walls have ears. You have to be careful and choose your words carefully, but yet at the same time move forward in the best way you can.
Yeah, 100%.
So what are you working on now, Vitaliy?
Um,
You're doing some great videos. I really urge people to check out your YouTube channel.
Appreciate it. So I think in terms of like my next video,
Yeah.
I want to do my next video on disassociations, such as, I don't know if you've ever heard of derealization or depersonalization.
Deprogramming.
No,
No.
not so basically, these are, I guess, like kind of like psychological. I don't know if you should call them traumas, but what depersonalization is the feeling that the outside world feels almost like dreamlike or foreign to you, and that's derealization, and depersonalization is when you're detached from your emotions, where you don't feel depression, sadness, or happiness. You feel very, you're like in a numb state. And this is basically what a lot of people go through, but everybody thinks they're on their own. So I haven't seen much videos on this topic. And like I said, I like to find truth that's very uncommon. So this is something a lot of people go through. It's kind of like everybody has had this at least once in their life, but there are some people who have it for long periods of time, for many years even.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like an existential like feeling. I don't know if you've ever had this before, where maybe you're driving somewhere, you're doing something, and you start to disassociate. You start to feel like things are not as real, or you just, I don't know how to explain it. You have this like,
I kind of know what you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah, where you're like, you feel like you're in a dream almost. So you're like, is any of this real right now? And it's just like, it's those few brief seconds that give you that weird feeling.
No,
But yeah.
I kind of know what you're talking about. I mean, it's when you talk about this, it makes me think about, and I'm sure you've written about this or done videos, the whole study of mind control as the whole business of psychology, which is an important and young science. Nevertheless, there's a component to it that's involved with how to control people's minds, how to control people's emotions. And after World War II, both the United States and the Soviets invested very heavily in this. And some of this came out in the late 70s during the Church Committee hearings, the MK Ultra project, that this was a coordinated, concertized study on how to control the minds and the emotions of the masses. I mean, as I said earlier, the Nazis perfected this to a high degree. The Soviets knew how to do it as well. I mean, they still do. So it's a really interesting subject, and it's something that the best way to combat it is doing what you're doing, Vitaliy, which is to understand it, to expose it, to research it, and to reveal it so that we can know what we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's all about the first step is to admit that you might have been wrong your whole life about a certain belief, right? The second step is to unlearn things. That's why in the Bible, Jesus commands, his followers, he says, you're not going to enter into heaven unless you are born again, unless you come to me like a child. It literally says like a baby. And the reason Jesus says that is because a baby is born without any preconceived ideas, right? It doesn't know anything. It's a tabla rasa, right? Clean slate. It knows nothing, which means that it's ready to receive the information that God will give it, right? Because the world, since we were little babies, has taught us a lot of false things. And when we hold on to these false beliefs, God cannot give you his information, his wisdom and knowledge, because the cup is already full. So the first step is to empty the cup, unlearn everything, become like a baby, like Jesus says, become a tabla rasa. And that's the best way to learn something is without bias right there.
It's a very good process. We should do it every day. And it's, in a way, some people might call this prayer. So Vitaliy, let my listeners and viewers know where they can check out your excellent show and information you'd like to share.
Okay, so my channel, I don't know if you could put in your bio possibly a link to it.
I can. Yep.
But my channel is called Alpha Talkz. So it's it's just Alpha and then Talks with a Z. You can find it on YouTube. It has about like 1,000 something subscribers. But yeah.
Excellent. All right, Vitaliy Podgornyy, I want to thank you for joining me. Great talk. Let's do it again soon.